UFO disclosure.
It is scary if that's true, Joe.
I think you guys are. I mean, you're certainly prominent.
Can I get the mic turned up on this bad boy?
Yeah, there's a little thing right there.
Shit.
You could hear your own voice. There's a volume knob right there. There we
Excellent.
go. We're up.
It's exciting times.
It is. It's very exciting times.
I've said it a few times that I never thought I would see it in my life. You know, I would just keep plugging away this is my 36th year doing this, chasing this crazy story. I never thought it would make this much progress. Still a long way to go, but...
Are you apprehensive at all that some of the stuff that they're releasing is bullshit?
Of course.
Of
wait,
course.
Wait, who's releasing?
I mean, when you see these the Pentagon's talking about it, when, you know, intelligent officials, you ever wonder whether or not it's disinformation?
Yeah. You want to?
Go ahead.
So, yeah, I'll take that first. Yeah, I've heard you kind of talk about that a bunch,
Yeah.
you know, and I think it's a very healthy suspicion to have. My perspective is a little different in that people are always coming at me with fake information, like every day, all the time. But the people in government that we have been able to kind of interface with, I wish there was an adult in the room. I wish that this was orchestrated through the media. It would give me some sort of hope that someone has some sort of control on this, and that has not been my experience.
Okay, what is your experience? Like, what's your impression of how it's all happening?
It's a big question. I don't know where to start on that, but here's what I know. I know that there are people in government that want some level of disclosure on whatever this is without defining it. Just there should be oversight. So I know that to be true. There are good people that think that people are running amok and there must be oversight, not just financially, but if these types of technologies actually exist.
Right, who's in control of them and why? And
Yeah.
who has access to them and why?
I mean, we have a history of disinformation and misinformation put out to the public and to Congress by the intelligence community, by the Pentagon. They lie all the time. It's part of the turf. It's part of the job. But for them to then go into closed-door briefings with members of Congress, with the oversight committees who handle their budgets, for them to lie about that, that's another matter. And I don't think they would because they could get busted for it. A lot of stuff is coming out now, and I know we get asked all the time, who's behind this push? You know, it looks like it's one big movement as opposed to a bunch of different things that all happened in approximately the same time. It's kind of been organic. Different people have come forward, and it encourages other people to come forward as opposed to somebody doing a master manipulation of the whole thing.
What resistance is there to this information getting out?
There's resistance on like multiple levels. So despite what you believe to be true or not true, the big question is, are we going to be able to verify some of these claims? That's all I care about, right? If we're back engineering some of these craft, then I believe that we should have the discovery process to find out if things like what David Grush has said under oath, that he has literally put his well-being and his safety on the line for, if that is true, then we have a duty to find out. So the pushback comes from many levels. There's stigma. It's fucking huge, dude. Like it is political toxicity for some of these senators to even, you know, people don't want to know, they don't want me to say I ever talk with them. It's like a toxic environment politically, the UFO thing.
Because everybody thinks it's bullshit, or you're a loon if you believe it. But not everybody, but quite a few people.
Not just that, it doesn't help you get reelected, man.
Right.
And then when you start poking the bear and going into the oversight committees and the Senate Intelligence Committee and the, you know, all these things, they're like, whoa, this is our territory. Why are you, as Congress, pushing on us? Why are you doing that? Like, this is our job. We have clearances. So there's that kind of pushback too.
You look back at the beginning of the cover-up, you know, why did it happen? Why did it start? Well, if 1947, this gigantic wave of UFOs suddenly appear. You got Kenneth Arnold, you got Roswell, hundreds of sightings all over. We'd just come out of World War II, and our military is faced with a new threat that they really don't know what the hell it is. They start looking at it and trying to figure it out, but they can't. So they sort of painted themselves into a corner of secrecy. Nobody wants to admit, if you're a president or chairman of the Joint Chiefs, there's something flying in our atmosphere, and we can't control it. We can't even catch it. We can't detect it on radar. There's not much we can do. They don't want to admit that. Secondly, I think what was told to me by a Senate intelligence guy who was a chief staffer who oversaw black budget operations. He had come out to Area 51 looking into the Lazar stuff years ago, early 90s. And he told me, look, if this is true, if this cover-up is going on, if they are diverting millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars from legitimate national security programs to keep this cover-up going, as he suspected there were, then somebody's going to go to prison. When it comes out, they'd go to prison. I think we heard Dave Grush speaking before this House committee in late July, in which he talked about special access programs, hundreds of millions of dollars being funneled into them. Nothing ever comes out. Congress has no oversight. Congress doesn't even know they exist. That's the kind of thing you could send somebody to prison if and when it comes out. And then the final reason, we can only speculate about it, maybe there really is a big secret. I wonder about it. If I was told, here's the real deal, here's what's going to happen if this comes out, society will collapse. It is so overwhelming, so disturbing that it would hit the fan, that everybody'd freak out. Maybe there is something like that. I don't know. But it gets dangerous for us to allow military folks to decide, I can know it, but you can't. Dad can know, but mom and the kids can't know. I don't like that.
Yeah,
I'd like to be able to know myself.
I don't like it either, but why do they think that society would collapse?
There was a Brookings Institute study that was done in 1960 where they looked at it. And, let's say it was confirmed that we came out and admitted that extraterrestrials are here. And they speculated, in looking at sociological matters, that social institutions would collapse. Do people want to still pay their taxes? Do they want to go to work? It was so overwhelming. The fact that we, a lesser species, have been discovered by something more intelligent. We know from human history how that works out. When the Europeans come to North America, we know what happens to the people who are already here, the less developed society. They collapsed. They were wiped out. And I think that was the projection of that study. The only way to get around that, they said, is to prepare for it over a long period of time, to condition folks to get ready for it. Now, I don't know if there was ever a policy where they instituted that, but it kind of looks like it. All the UFO and alien movies and TV shows and X-Files this and books and reports and children's cartoons, it almost looks like we've been conditioned to get ready for it over the last 60 years.
When people talk about the possibility of these being some sort of black ops creation by the Defense Department, some sort of weapons grade drone that moves at insane speeds with some unknown technology that they've developed in secrecy, that kind of falls apart when you go back to 47. If you go back to 47 and you're seeing these vehicles that are behaving in a very similar way, or at least described in a very similar way, where they just jet off at insane rates of speed, no visible means of propulsion, no sound, that's the one thing that brings me back. Like, God, they seem to act the same. At least some of them do. They seem to be, and if we're talking about 1947, we can really safely assume that they did not have drone technology capable of, super hypersonic speeds at that time.
I'm really glad you mentioned that, because that is a big part of the issue here. Is like people can just say, oh, this is really special projects that are even being hidden by our own government. The thing is, the UFO phenomenon has been...
There was no, to my knowledge, there hasn't been any correlation of that. And the creatures that are described in Socorro in New Mexico and in Valençol in France, so those are three cases that I've been very involved in from the beginning, from day one, involve creatures that are about 3 feet tall, that breathe our air,
Hairless?
recognize our signals, communicate with us in funny ways, even mentally. I mean, the witnesses describe getting images in their minds and so on, in all three cases. And what's interesting is, people can argue about Trinity all they want, like they argue about Roswell, but the case in Socorro and the case in France, in Valençol, were investigated by governments, not by the local UFO group, although the local UFO group did a good job in all those cases. But they were, in Socorro, it was first the local police. The local policemen saw the craft and the beings and described what happened. He was terrified, but when the thing took off, he thought it was something to do with some new gadget or some work in the desert. It's an area that's still in the same state today. I've gone back there with Dr. Hynek's son, with Paul Hynek a few months ago. I've gone several times there. And so after the police, turned out the FBI was in town on another case. They had no jurisdiction in New Mexico for that particular case. It wasn't a federal case, but they helped preserve the traces, the FBI way. And the local police was happy to have them there. And then there was the state police came in and did an investigation. And then people from the base, came in with experts in explosives, experts in recovery of weapons and rockets and so on, because they thought it might be something that had come from the Trinity Range that was out of its way,
right,
and had crashed near Socorro,
right,
in which case they might have responsibility, including financial responsibility if something was destroyed or whatever. So this was very serious. I have the whole file. Okay, it's a big file.
right.
Nobody's looking at it. I mean, the investigation in Washington now, they are saying, we're going to look at the cases of the last 12 months. Well, what kind of science is that? Can you imagine scientists reading this? And this is the way they are going to solve the UFO problem, by looking at vague pictures of lights in the sky for 1 year? Why don't they go back to those records? Those are federal records. Okay, the case in Valençol, 5 agencies of the French government. So this guy was a farmer. He had a field where he was growing plants to make perfume. So this was high level, expensive crop. This wasn't just, alfalfa or something. And he goes there at 5 o'clock in the morning because, he wants to do to water the thing and so on before the sun is up, because it's going to be it's in the south of France. It's going to be very hot. You can't work in the field during the early afternoon. So he wants to be done with that. He sees this contraption, in the middle of the field, crushing the plants. And so he sneaks in, and he's paralyzed. Okay? Now, there is an egg-shaped object, just like the one, at Trinity, just like the one in Socorro. It's the size of a mid-sized truck. There are 2 creatures in front of it, human looking, 2 eyes, breathing air. They look at him, sort of amused, and one of them has something on his belt. He takes out, pointed at him, and that's when he's paralyzed. Now, he's not, as you know, I'm not a doctor, but I've gone to doctors about what kind of paralysis is that, where you can stand up and watch something, you just can't move. They said, well, there is a type of paralysis that will just inhibit the motor, motor nerves, where but you'll still be up and aware. You're not going to fall down, in a heap. And from there, he sees them going back inside the thing. The thing takes off. It takes off like a shot out of a gun, and it vanishes in midair. Okay. Now, he goes to see the gendarmes. This man is fairly wealthy. He owns quite a bit of, several fields, expensive crops. His wife is the mayor of the town. The gendarmes are going to be very careful with him because he's also from the resistance in World War II. When he was young, he joined the resistance, and the resistance in that part of France fought in the Alps against the Germans, and they were regarded as heroes of World War II. And so the gendarmes are very careful with him. There are some things he's not going to tell the gendarmes because he thinks, and I went there, he didn't want to talk to anybody from Paris. He didn't want to be on TV. He wanted to concentrate on his experience because he thought there was going to be something else. And he was aware of some of his buddies. Now, this is a part of France where people talk, but they have secrets too. I mean, historically, there are things like that in the U.S., parts where people are not going to talk to strangers.
Right.
The only reason I could go there was that I went there with a lady who was from Paris, with the government. She was with de Gaulle's government. She had the rank of ambassador, and she had a vacation home there. So we went there for 3 days, and she knew everybody there. And he told us what he thought might happen again. And he didn't want the gendarmes mixed in with what he was doing.
Why did he think that something was going to happen again?
They evidently, and he swore us to secrecy about what it was, but evidently there was communication with the beings when he was there.
And
now,
so these beings just tiny, look like people. Did they have different features than us? Or was it just human
They are
features?
just like the ones at Trinity and like the ones at Socorro. So in that book you have actually 2, 2, and 3. You have 7 creatures that are humanoid, that breathe our air, that seem to understand us. The visual, there is visual contact. Well, we can have visual contact with animals. I mean,
Right.
That doesn't mean they are human or meta-human, but there is messages that come through all of that that the witnesses are reluctant to talk about in all 3 cases. So in Socorro, finally, the Air Force went there. They threw the Air Force out because the Air Force said, well, that's just a gadget, and from the base, and that was stupid. So they finally sent Dr. Hynek there, and Dr. Hynek asked me to organize the files that were coming. I was at Northwestern at the time, working. I had done my PhD already, and I was on the staff of the computing center, and we had a small team trying to help, free, trying to help Hynek keep the files together. So we were, in communication with him the whole time, and then I put the files together, and I have a file. This is the official file.
So these people were reluctant to talk about what these creatures were communicating with them. But did they talk about it at all?
It was very personal.
Very personal.
Yeah. There had been a communication that transcended their life. There was something else, something outside. So you could almost call it a sort of a religious feeling, but it wasn't. It wasn't about divinity or God specifically, but it was about the other side of life, a bigger meaning for life. But that's their interpretation. It may not be. There may be other things that they are trying to communicate,
but it was very profound for them.
Yes, but
all 3 cases had similar stories in that regard.
And in all 3 cases, there are traces that were measured. There were, there is technology of sort, and In the case of Socorro, people came up with all kinds of ideas that maybe it was a balloon, a special balloon, right? There were only 12 of them in the world and so on. Well, in the book, people haven't noticed it, but in the book, I was able to solve that problem because I found a transcript of a conversation with a man who was head of a motor pool at the on the army range at White Sands, and he had given his team some instructions on how to make sure that the motor pool was working really well, because White Sands is so big. When people went home, they could get lost, at White Sands, and then how are you going to find them? I mean, there are tracks, but there is no paved road at the time. How are you going to, find them? So you can launch a helicopter the next day looking for, a lost car somewhere with a family in it. But so he made rules that they had to call periodically to report where they were when they went home, 50 miles away across the desert. So they could find them if there was something wrong with the car. He's driving home with his family. This is after the Socorro thing is done. They are all interrogating Lonnie Zamora, the cop who was driving that thing. And he sees a light over the mountains in the southwest towards Mexico. But it's still, it's still in New Mexico, but it's in that direction. A light that's not a star, it's really bright. And the light gets brighter and brighter, and his car dies. Now, he's head of a motor pool, for the base. Everybody reports to him, and they have all the army cars and the trucks and everything else, the half-tracks. So he looks at that thing. He tries to call his team. The radio doesn't work. The radio should work. The radio doesn't work. And the thing gets very bright, and then it recedes. It goes away the way it apparently came in. We don't know if it came in or if it just got bright. Okay, so the car starts. He goes home, and then the next day he goes to his shop. He gets his staff together. He says, you guys are going to take this car apart. I want to see every screw and every piece of it and every lever and everything and the seats and so on. I want to see all of that on the floor. And you're going to test it, and you're going to tell me what's changed, or if anything, how that car stopped in the middle of the desert. And they couldn't find anything. And that report was an official report, that was never published. And it nails the whole thing, that this was not a balloon. This was not an hallucination. The patrolman wasn't drunk like they accused him of, or making up a story and so on.
Thing, I'm not saying I was like a believer either way on the subject, but this was a topic of concern apparently for the Pentagon. And in 2018, I started doing kind of what I call my open source literature review. Like, let me spin myself up on this topic, watching Chris Mellon, Lou Elizondo, Leslie Kean, all these people talk about the subject. And then, just trying to understand, so what is this with UFOs? Has this been going on for a while? The answer is yes, like Foo Fighters, sightings of weird stuff in antiquity, etc., which we can get into later. But and so early 2019 comes along, and my boss at the National Reconnaissance Office, in kind of my Air Force major capacity, forwarded me an email from what became stood up in, I guess it was 2018, which was the unidentified, it was aerial, now anomalous phenomena task force, UAP task force. So the UAP task force director sent my boss an email saying, hey, we're looking for a rep to the task force. And as like any good officer, I was like, well, I'll put it on my performance report. Hey, I was on a task force, and that would look good. And I, being well cleared, and also a bachelor's degree in physics, master's in intelligence analysis, I'm like, you know what? I'll figure out what this shit is. It's either going to be weather shit. Maybe it's an adversarial program. Maybe it's like a U.S. program. People are misidentifying on rare occasions. So fuck it. I'll go see where the data takes me. And early 2019 or so, I joined the UAP task force. And then I started, interviewing pilots, flag officers, general officer equivalent type Navy folks. And, they were seeing some really crazy shit. And like a, event that I talked about previously publicly in a YouTube video on the Yes Theory channel, there was this one 30-year senior Navy officer that, he was going to work, sober, no predisposition for fantasy, all that kind of stuff, because I interviewed the individual for a couple hours, and he saw this, crazy triangle hover over his car going to work at a certain naval facility, and it like blew his mind. He was serious. The paint on his car turned milky white after the incident. So to me, that sounds like ionizing radiation. So like ultraviolet, just like how your headlights get all foggy over time if you park your car out in the sun. Same phenomenon just happened, within 24-hour period. And I'm like, whoa. If this is true, and the oral testimony and crazy radar data that I saw when I was on the task force, stuff making turns that didn't make any sense. Well, holy shit, what is this stuff then?
This anomaly with his paint is this documented? Is this photographs or?
Yes, I saw photographs. It was documented. Yeah.
And what is there a conventional explanation?
I mean, based on what he described, something to rapidly ionize his paint like that within a day, I can't think of anything off the top of my head in terms of some conventional aerospace technology. And this was a certain facility in the continental U.S. This was not overseas. So it's not like our adversaries flying some spooky thing in U.S. airspace.
So this thing hovered over his car for how long?
Couple minutes while he was traveling at about 60 miles an hour. So it was pacing.
How
his
far
vehicle.
away from his vehicle?
It's probably a couple hundred feet in altitude. It was less than 1,000 feet, which is
Really?
also bad because from an airspace perspective, pilots would know this. Anything under 1,000 feet? No. Unless you get special clearance, and you only do that over controlled airspace, like a military test ranges, right? Like
Right.
people fly low and that kind of thing.
So is he on, what kind of a highway is he on?
A conventional civilian highway.
Civilian highway. So anyone could have been on it.
Yes.
And it just happened to be this guy. Did he have any other experiences with this thing?
No, this was like a once-in-a-lifetime thing. He kept it to himself for a couple years, but then he...
So
the task force
what was
came
his
out.
name?
I don't what he's
Okay.
That individual's still on
Let's
active
call him
duty.
Bob.
Yeah.
But did anybody say to him, hey, Bob, what the fuck happened to your car?
That's a good question. I don't remember if people asked him about his car. So he took
that's-
pride in his car, so it actually was probably more upsetting to him personally.
What kind of
'cause
car was it?
It was like a Toyota or something. So
Okay.
Yeah.
So all of a sudden his Toyota's fucked. So
Yeah.
Okay. And so did he have to report this? Is this something that...
He did not report it, to my knowledge, to anybody. It wasn't until he reported it to us about 5 years later that it happened.
So are these kind of experiences something that a lot of these pilots are embarrassed about discussing or have apprehension about discussing because they could be ridiculed?
Yeah, a lot of people that are on flight status, they don't want to be sent to the psych, right? There's a whole aerospace physiology kind of empire in the military. If you're an operator or a guy, a missile key turner, you're on what they call a personal reliability program. If you're taking Tylenol, you got to report it. If you have a fever, you got to report it because you're in control of nuclear weapons when you're on duty. So
Right.
yeah.
And so this idea of being predisposed to fantasy, that's also something that they sort of talk to these people about or try to get a gauge of
Yeah. These are people that are very sober-minded. I mean, this individual was early in the morning, going to work, not under the influence of anything, and that person had a similar clearance as mine, TSSCI. So we've gone through
What's that?
top secret, sensitive Department of Information clearance, and just like myself, I've been through multiple polygraphs in my career. So did this individual. So.
Does he have any idea or any theories about why this thing was following him?
No, that's what freaked him out the most, because he didn't have any experience in his life like this. It totally blew his mind when he looked out his moonroof and then looked out the side of his car door and saw this 300-foot triangle. It was like pre-dawn sky, but it was darker than the pre-dawn sky, and it had this plasma edges, it was purplish glowing edges, and these three lights that had these omnidirectional, almost like pool lights, how you can't really tell where the light source is. And it was totally trippy. And that's just one example of many anecdotal, with some evidence, pilot stories. And that's what made me dig deeper. And I started, cultivating my network. Has the government studied this before? This wasn't just OSAP and ATIP and Blue Book and all this shit in the past, right? This seems serious. So certainly the government has looked at this, and, I went to search for that program, and that's what I ended up whistleblowing on, right?
So how did you initially discover this program, and what was your first encounter with the information?
A very senior individual in the intel community came to me when I guess I was asking a lot of questions because I'm a very inquisitive guy, and it was like, hey, I need to introduce you to somebody. He listed that certain person's academic credentials, which were beyond reproach, PhD level education, clearance, resume was insane. I'm like, well, okay, sure, I'll talk to this person, and I ended up meeting that person in a top secret facility, and he started discussing hey, there's a program, I was on it, and we were reverse engineering crash material that we've recovered over the decades, and he's like, I'm not joking, we're telling you because you guys have to report to the Deputy Secretary of Defense and Congress on this matter, right? And we were actively briefing Secretary Esper, Deputy Secretary Norquist, other cabinet level folks, right? And it's there's an oversight issue because you're the UAP task force. You should be read into this stuff because why spend the taxpayers, dollars looking at stuff that we already have data on?
Right.
So that spooked me, and that was fall of 2019. And I don't take a guy's word for it. I'm like, you know what? Myself and my trusted colleagues that had a lot of special accesses like me, we cultivated our network, and we ultimately interviewed about 40 people or so, all the way up to multi-star generals, directors of agencies, mid-level guys that literally touched it, worked inside of it, all the stuff. They brought intel reports for me to look at, documents, and a lot of that I could cross-verify with other oral sources that my high-level colleagues or I talked to, and it checked out. Especially when I had enough information on, and I know who specifically to ask. Hey, well, I want read into this. I'm on the UAP task force, and we went to those. I'll call them gatekeepers for the lack of a better term, and they basically said, "Fuck you" to me and my colleagues.
So why were these other people willing to discuss this with you?
Well, they determined I didn't need to know. I was already cleared at such a high level, handling presidential material and everything. It's Dave needs to know. And they felt that coming to us, it was a form of a protected disclosure. They felt that they weren't really violating anything because, we were I'll call it the investigatory body for the Department of Defense and the intelligence community and Congress at the time. And they, you are allowed to, disclose to a government official in an official capacity. And I, did that. And, of course, I protected those people. And